Oh, I'd love it, yeah, you know, that would be
Playing hard to get.
It was CPA down in Baltimore,
I think we guys are still.
yeah.
Talking about it. I set up a couple of times in the last year.
If, you know, you move to me, you know, it's where your family is, where your heart is, you know, there's a lot of decisions, especially as you get older.
Yeah, Tim's gonna be.
Does he have family?
His brother in law, his sister in law, away. And there's another, I think
All right, I think we'll get started. Everyone can hear me all right? Awesome. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for the Community Preservation Act Information Session and Public Priority Forum. So, as many of you may already know, the Community Preservation Act, or CPA, is a fantastic opportunity to advance local projects around historic resources, open space and recreation, as well as community housing. But to make the most of this opportunity, we really need to get feedback from the community, from community members like you, about how you want to see these dollars invested and what the community needs in these categories really are. So this is the second of 3 community forums that we're hosting this month. Yesterday we had a virtual forum around 1 o'clock that was recorded, and so that is going to be uploaded to the City of Worcester website so that people can watch that later and follow up with an online survey that replicates a lot of the activities that we're going to be doing tonight. Excuse me. Additionally, we're going to hold a Spanish language forum next Wednesday, December 18th in the Worcester Public Library. So in this way, we are trying to reach as many people as possible. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We do have the bathrooms open tonight on the 3rd floor. The men's room is located on this side, and the women's room is a little bit further down if you just exit this room and turn to the left. Additionally, as you might have noticed already, we have some great food tonight provided by Sabrosa Venezuela. They are a minority women-owned business here in Worcester, and they make some fabulous arepas, so I definitely encourage you to try those. Excuse me. So let's get started. So my name is Jacqueline Burmeister, and I work for the City of Worcester Executive Office of Economic Development, and I manage the Community Preservation Program. I'm also joined tonight by Paul Morano, the Assistant Chief of Economic Development of the Special Projects Division. We also have tonight the chair of our Community Preservation Committee. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the committee does in a little while, but for now, just know that these are folks, residents of Worcester, who are extremely interested in trying to advance CPA in the most fair way possible throughout the city. So we'll talk more about the CPC in a bit. So tonight, we have 2 goals for this session. The first goal is to share information on the Community Preservation Act, where it came from, what the money is adding up to, and then what the minimum eligibility is for projects that is required by the state. But on top of that, after those minimum requirements, the City of Worcester really does have a lot of opportunity to choose projects it wishes to advance. And specifically, the Community Preservation Committee in the City of Worcester is really interested in forwarding projects with this money that are aligned with the community's priorities, right? We are going to get so many great applications using CPA funds, and we want to make sure that the projects that ultimately get funded are aligned with what the community is asking for. And so tonight, we are having a priority listening session. So we are going to take the priorities that we gather from you folks, and we are going to turn those into the goals of the Community Preservation Program. And from the Community Preservation Program goals, we are going to form criteria that are going to be used to rank the projects as they come in. Then those projects that have the highest ranking will be goals, which will be reflected by the priorities of the community. So that is really where we're trying to go with this tonight. So how will we begin? We're going to start with a brief introduction to the Community Preservation Act. I'm going to talk about the Community Preservation Committee, and I'll give a brief overview of all those three funding categories: historic resources, open space and recreation, as well as community housing. At that point, we're going to have our first exercise. So this exercise is your chance as residents to really weigh in on what you feel the most important funding categories are, before we dig into even the more granular themes of each of those funding categories. We're going to be getting up, we're going to be using sticky notes and colored dots to put our priorities on the board. And then after we're done with that, we'll sit back down and we'll start talking about historic resources. I've spent a lot of time over the last few months with the City of Worcester to speak with a lot of groups around the city that work in these areas, and they've suggested some things that they've seen on the ground as needs in these realms of historic resources, open space, and community housing. I'm going to share those themes with you tonight, and then you'll have a chance to share, much in the same way, how you feel about those priorities and if they resonate with you. Additionally, if there are any themes that have been missed, you will have an opportunity to add those onto our boards so that we can consider them with everything else. So we're going to go through, we'll do historic resources first, we'll talk about those themes, you'll have a chance to get up and rank them, and then we'll do the same with open space and recreation as well as community housing. Does anyone have any questions before we begin? There will be a few opportunities for questions. Feel free to raise your hand at any point if you need me to stop. We actually have a small enough crowd tonight that I should be able to respond in the moment. So just feel free to do that and let me know if you are curious about going into more detail on something. So first, what is the Community Preservation Act? So the Community Preservation Act is actually a state law, Massachusetts state law, that was passed in the year 2000. And what it does is it allows communities to establish a community preservation fund. So this fund is actually a local fund that can only and ever be used for funding local projects in those three categories: open space and recreation, historic resources, and community housing. It will never be put into the general fund. It always has to be spent on those things. On November 8th of 2022, in the municipal election, question 5 on the ballot was for CPA here in Worcester. The voters approved CPA to go into law here in Worcester community. And with that, they approved a surcharge of 1.5% on the annual property tax beginning in fiscal year 24. So this is not 1.5% on top of your 13% residential taxes. This is 1.5% of the total amount of property taxes that you're paying. And it's actually after the first $100,000 of the value of your property. So if you own a house that's worth $200,000, you're paying 1.5% on top of the total property taxes on the second $100,000. This is for residential, commercial, and industrial properties. However, all of the usual abatements apply. If you apply for an abatement for someone who qualifies as low income or low and medium income senior, then you are eligible to have that exemption. So what does that actually mean for the average resident? This is kind of a breakdown of the average value of several different types of property in the city of Worcester. The average single-family home in the city of Worcester is valued at about $371,000, and the annual CPA surcharge there is about $56. So that's about how much we're looking at that 1.5% shaking out to. The surcharge was split between the final 2 quarterly bills that were issued in December of 2023 and March of 2024. With our current tax software, it's showing up as a separate bill in the envelope, but beginning in fiscal year 26, we will actually have all of it into the same tax bill, which will go to your mortgage company if you have an escrow, but it will all be clearly laid out. So that 1.5% surcharge is a piece of our community preservation fund. What's really exciting about CPA is that we also get a state match as a CPA community. So that annual state match comes from a state trust fund, which is comprised of funds that are collected over the year from surcharges on fees on transactions at the Registry of Deeds. So all of that money, everyone pays into it every time that they're at the Registry of Deeds, and that all goes into the state trust fund that's divided amongst the 200 CPA communities in the state. This year, we finished our first year with CPA, and we have received our first check from the state trust fund, and we've received $750,000 approximately that will go into our community preservation fund. So between the surcharge and the state match, we have quite a bit, and we can accrue interest on that. So anything that we haven't spent, and we haven't spent any money yet, this program is just beginning, which is why we're doing these community sessions now, we're able to accrue interest, which these days actually does add up quite a bit. In fiscal year 24, revenues were about $3.6 million. And we estimate that now that we have the state match coming in fiscal year 25, to have about $4.7 million coming in. So we have a pretty good chunk of money that we're going to be able to spend on CPA eligible projects. So there are a few restrictions that the state has set up for how we use this money. And after we talk a little bit about those restrictions, then we'll get into the ways that we want to spend it here in the city. So these are really capital projects, so we're not able to pay for salaries or maintenance costs. These are really just physical improvements. There is a requirement that we set aside 10% of our revenues every year into the Community Preservation Fund into each of the three funding categories. That means that 10% of that $3.6 million goes into open space and recreation, 10% into historic conservation, or historic resources, and then 10% into community housing. So we already have $360,000 in each of those funds from fiscal year 24, which is really great. We are allowed to have an optional 5% budgeted toward administration. So this is stuff like due diligence, property appraisals, food for public meetings, consultants, and salaries of staff members. The remaining 65% of that fund, of our revenues, can be spent on any of those three funding categories. So you could theoretically spend up to 75% of your revenues on any one of those categories. The other exciting thing is that the Act does not specify or restrict who can apply for these funds. So it can be city projects, but it could also be nonprofits or community groups or even individuals that are able to submit applications for what is ultimately a grant fund. So who's deciding which projects get chosen ultimately? So we have a Community Preservation Committee, which, much like many of the boards and commissions here in the city, are made up by Worcester residents. Here in Worcester, we have a 9-person committee. It's comprised of 4 at-large members, so this could be really anyone can apply for those seats. And then we have members from the various others committees throughout the city. We have a member from CONCOM, a member from the Historical Commission, a member from the Planning Board, someone from Parks and Rec, and someone from the Worcester Housing Authority Board. And this is mandated by the state because the state felt like this committee needs to be made up of folks who really are familiar with a lot of these, with what goes on in these worlds. And so what the CPC does is they prepare and annually revise the Community Preservation Plan, which outlines the goals of the program. So this plan is going to outline the priorities and the goals and the criteria which projects are going to be chosen in the city of Worcester on top of those eligibility requirements required by the state. So the CPC, as I mentioned, is very much interested in hearing what you all have to say tonight. We also have a community preservation manager here in Worcester, and that's me. And I serve as the liaison between the Community Preservation Committee as well as the public. I provide technical assistance to both. And I really track our CPA funding and ensure compliance with the state. And just really am here for you as residents anytime you need anything from related to CPA. So I'm going to talk really briefly now about eligibility requirements from the state when it comes to CPA funding. And I'll just go through this briefly and give you some examples from other communities about projects that have happened there that might start getting you excited and thinking about some of the possibilities here in the city of Worcester. So when it comes to historic resources, the state describes historic resources as a building, structure, vessel, which is a boat, real property, document, or artifact that is either listed on the Massachusetts State Register of Historic Places. This is also known as MACRIS. It's an online registry of historic buildings and properties. Or that has been determined as locally historically significant by the Historical Commission. Here in Worcester, we have a Historical Commission that up to this point has really been overseeing historic buildings on that state list, but will eventually have an increased purview to determine if CPA projects meet this locally historically significant designation. Welcome, feel free to hop in and sit down. So some of the projects that historic resources, that can qualify for historic resource funding are the acquisition of historic resources, the preservation of historic resources, as well as the rehabilitation and restoration of historic resources. So some examples of those may include, in Boston, they acquired a historic stable that they then turned into an educational site about colonialism. Or in Situate, they purchased Abraham Lincoln's great-great-great-grandfather's house to use as an educational space. A preservation project for historic resources may include something like what they did in Milford, where they replaced the HVAC unit in the room where they were storing a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, you want to keep that, in good condition, and an HVAC unit is a really important and expensive investment into doing that. Another thing that folks have done using preservation funds for historic resources is preserving town records through digitization. So here in Worcester, we actually have quite a few town records in our basement that need to be digitized as well. So some rehabilitation and restoration projects when it comes to historic resources. In Marshfield, they rehabilitated a historical burial ground by doing gravestone restorations, which is a pretty cool project. And they also had in Springfield, a grant program for restoration of the exteriors of historic homes that individuals could apply up to $30,000 to restore their homes to historic standards. When it comes to open space and recreation, the state defines open space as land to protect existing and future well fields, aquifers, recharge areas, watershed land, saltwater marshes, streams, lakes, pond frontage, dunes, anything really to protect scenic vistas, land for wildlife or nature preserves, or land for recreational use. When it comes to outdoor recreation, CPA does specify that these recreational activities have to be outdoors, but they include active or passive recreational use, including but not limited to the use of land for community gardens, trails, and non-commercial youth and adult sports, as well as the use of land for playground or athletic fields. There are a few exceptions here that I just want to make known from the very beginning. CPA, under the state law, does not allow for the purchase or construction of artificial turf or the indoor construction of stadiums. So this is outdoor recreation. Sidewalk construction is allowed inside of parks, but it's not allowed on right-of-ways. The idea being that CPA is supposed to be a fund that enhances our city, not replace DPW's existing budget. So sidewalks are fine as long as they're in parks and not part of the right-of-way. And then of course, we're not allowed to have any dog or horse racing facilities funded with CPA. Some of the projects for open space and recreation include acquisition of land for use as open space or outdoor recreation, the creation of open space or outdoor recreation opportunities, preservation of open space and recreational facilities, or rehabilitation of recreational facilities, as well as rehabilitation of open space that was initially purchased with CPA funds. So some examples of this for outdoor recreation and open space, an acquisition project may be just the town of Truro buying beach area to extend Great Hollow Beach. That's pretty cool. Acquisition of 61 acres of open space in Dartmouth to put in more hiking trails. For creation, construction of pickleball courts on municipal land in Southampton happened back in 2020. And yeah, they've been on the pickleball for a little while now, I guess. So construction of trails on existing parcel in Sturbridge as well is a creation, example of creation of recreation. Preservation, removal of invasive species can qualify as a preservation project in some cases, as well as the purchase of an agricultural restriction, which is what they did on 12 acres of land in Deerfield to protect that agricultural land. We also have rehabilitation projects, so you can rehabilitate a local skate park like they did in Tewksbury, or have design fees paid for the rehabilitation of a public pool as they did in Weston in 2023. So those are some examples of projects that have been pursued in other communities for open space and recreation. And finally, we have community housing. So community housing is a term that's used by the state law that is defined as low and moderate income housing for individuals and families, including low to moderate income seniors. And so their definitions are slightly different from HUD's, or the Housing and Urban Development Federal Department. But in general, low income is 80% of the area-wide median income, up to 100% of the area median income is moderate income. So that's the housing that serves those populations all qualify. And a senior is a person having reached the age of 60 or over. So the types of projects that can be funded with community housing CPA dollars include acquisition of land or buildings for use for community housing, creation of community housing, preservation of community housing, or the support of community housing pre-development activities. So this is actually pretty special. Most of the other categories don't allow for the funding of support activities, but given that community housing is such a large endeavor, they have decided that pre-development activities can also qualify for CPA funds. You can also rehabilitate and restore community housing as long as it was initially purchased with CPA funds. So some examples of acquisition projects. The purchase of a building to turn into community housing, which is what they did in Cambridge. They used $7.9 million of their CPA funds for that. Or even just like a down payment assistance program, which was what they did in Dartmouth. They created a program to help other folks purchase or acquire community housing. Creation, the construction of a deed-restricted affordable housing duplex. Habitat for Humanity built one of these in Amherst in 2016. Or we're allowed to simply transfer funds to the Municipal Housing Trust Fund, excuse me. And we do have a Municipal Housing Land Trust here, Municipal Affordable Housing Trust here in the city of Worcester, which currently is working to develop affordable housing. And so one option that we have is to transfer money to them so that they can take care and do what they do best. The preservation element for community housing, you could replace windows or doorways, which is what they did in Arlington back in 2021 and 2022. And those are for housing authority projects that obviously qualify for as community housing. For support of community housing, we have engineering fees for new community housing, which is what they did in Great Barrington, or doing preliminary design work to obtain zoning relief for community housing. So these are just some very diverse examples of community housing projects that have taken place across the state. So that was a lot of information, and I recognize that it's probably hard to hold on to exactly everything that is eligible for CPA funds. However, we have, the state has created a matrix to try and simplify this for folks so that when they apply, they can very easily know if they qualify for the minimum eligibility by the state. And so this matrix lists across the top the 4 categories. Well, they break up open space and recreation, the different categories on top, and then the different verbs that I've been describing throughout this presentation: acquire, create, preserve, support, and rehabilitate. And so you can very quickly find if your project is eligible on this table by looking for a yes or a no. So if you wanted to acquire a space for recreational purposes, you could very simply find that that is indeed eligible. So at this point, we're about to jump into our first exercise. But before we did that, I just wanted to entertain any questions that people had up to this point. I know some of you have already seen this portion of the presentation before. So I just wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions you might have had, or some folks who maybe this is the first time hearing this information. Brian.
The grants you already mentioned, do you have a percentage of how many were governmental and semi-governmental organizations that received the grants?
That's a really great question, and I think that it probably depends on the community. I don't have that data off the top of my head, but you know what? I could probably find that for you. So one resource that's out there that's really great is the Community Preservation Coalition, which is a state nonprofit that's been around since the beginning of CPA in 2020. They've been providing technical assistance to all the CPA communities since that time, and they've been kind of tracking all the projects that they've done, which are like close to 8,000 at this point. So I'm guessing that they probably have some kind of statistics on that, but I couldn't tell you at this point. I apologize. But the community really does get to decide what the breakdown is going to be. And for all intents and purposes, I think here in Worcester, we're really anticipating that it's going to be a community-driven fund. Any other questions? Yes?
On that transfer of funds to the Affordable Trust, is there any cap on that or any stipulation? Like, could they apply for the majority of the funds, or is it an application process, or is it?
So that's something that we're still working out. We do have a little bit of, I'm sorry, let me go back to the beginning of your question. You cannot do more than 75% of the fund to any particular category, right? So you are still required to have the minimum of 10% of your revenues go to the other two funding categories, open space, recreation, and historic resources. You can theoretically put the other 75% into housing, in which case you could put it into the fund. That would be a decision that is made by the community and the Community Preservation Committee. As far as how that process looks, we're still working through what that would look like internally. But if you have any thoughts on what you think, there's going to be an opportunity for you to write those down and let us know. Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, I am going to do a brief overview of how we're going to do these community priority category exercises. So you're all receiving a packet right now that's including a bunch of sticky notes, sticky dots. And these dots are supposed to help indicate your alignment with a lot of the themes and questions that I'm going to be presenting to you. So you're going to have different colors representing how aligned you are with certain themes or questions that you see up here. And so blue is your most aligned and red is your the least aligned. In this first round, you also have an orange dot, and that's just that it's right in the middle for you. So in addition to using these dots, you'll put one dot in each space. You're going to have some sticky notes as well. So if you do feel like you want to add a comment or a question or a priority that you felt was missing, you could also write on these sticky notes. They're up there if you want to grab them. There are some pens as well. And the idea is that we're going to have these boards up here, and you're going to be able to go up there and kind of, there'll be a little bit of information on each of the things, and you'll be able to use the colors that most align with how you feel about it. We've got some keys up there. You also have some keys on your stickers themselves. So the first exercise is which of these funding categories are most important to you. And so I'm asking you to consider all three of these funding categories and to add stickers to these boards to represent how important it is that we support each one of these categories with CPA funds. Right now, we're able to put a minimum of 10% in each of these categories, but we could actually put more if we wanted to, and designate that to be something that we want to do. So these are the different colors that you're able to put on the board. Red is it's not important when compared to the other funding categories. Yellow is that the category is somewhat less important when compared to the other funding categories. Orange is that it's equally important. Green is that it's somewhat more important. And blue is that it is the most important funding category. So I'm going to invite you all up here tonight to go through the 3 panels that we have. The first one is historic resources. It summarizes a little bit of the eligibility requirements there from the state. Then we have open space and recreation and community housing. And I invite you all to put a dot in each that coordinates with the color that you feel most aligns for you. If anyone here has difficulty with colors, we actually have another set of stickers as well that has the actual colors written on them. So we just let people know if maybe the colors are hard to see. All right, so if you all want to come on up and put your stickers, and feel free to ask any questions too. I know this first one is kind of a little bit more tricky as we're getting used to it, but hopefully it will become a little more natural as we move through the evening. So the stickers will go in these portions here. So there's the 3. There's community housing, open space and recreation, and historic resources. So 1 sticker for each, depending on red is you're not really into it, and blue is you're really into it. You can be really into all of them.
So we can discuss this after each one,
So we are going to be sharing these boards with the Community Preservation Committee afterwards, and we'll be taking a picture documenting and comparing these results with the results from the other meetings and tallying them all up. And so we'll be putting together a report that will be made available that kind of summarizes what we found.
Okay.
Yep. And if anyone has any comments, if they want to say something about any of these, there's some sticky notes on the table as well. You could write in some notes. But this is just like the warm-up, general, straightforward. How do you feel about each of these funding categories?
Yeah, I apologize for the heat too. It was on 77. I'm trying to get it down to 60.
If they're all equally, you could put, you could do 3 blue, or you can put, well, the blue is that you think it's the most important. Determine what people can. Yeah, so if they're all equally important, then you might want to put the orange one. Oh, yeah.
How are you, David?
Pretty good.
Sorry to hear what happened to you.
It's unfortunately unsurprising. Like Worcester is
It shouldn't have happened.
agreed. Agreed.
I feel bad, so.
Thank you.
Sir, are there 5 things to comment on?
There are just 3.
Everybody keeps asking. I don't know.
Yeah, so this is the first exercise. We're going to be going deeper into each of these momentarily.
Maureen, I don't know.
I would.
I still got your number.
Good. Thanks, everyone.
Be the fun.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. So we've got, we see a lot of green and blue here in open space and recreation. We have a little more diversity with the community housing, the colors, and a lot of them here in the historic resources as well. All right. Well, thank you so much. So that was kind of like our warm-up round. It's going to get a little bit deeper in a little bit. So as we move into these different funding categories, or these different funding categories, we're going to be thinking more about the types of these different funding category projects that we want to see funded. So I'm going to ask you, as we move into the historic resources category, that we're not comparing historic resources to open space anymore or to community housing. We're just thinking, if we're thinking about historic resources, what are the projects that are most important to us? And so what I've been up to for the last 4 months since I've started this position, I've been spending a lot of time talking to folks around the community, as well as reading up on existing plans in the city of Worcester. I've been reviewing plans specifically that have been made in collaboration with the community in order to begin to understand some of the priorities that may already exist around these different categories and really have a place to start. In addition to that, I've been talking with a lot of community groups that work in these different funding categories. These are folks who really have made it their life's passion to understand these needs in the city of Worcester. And between reviewing those existing plans and these interviews with community groups, I began to notice a few themes emerge. And so throughout this process, I've teased out a bunch of those themes about those needs and what they think the priorities should be here in Worcester. And so what I have tonight is an assemblage of those themes, and I'm really looking for you to weigh in to see if you think that those really resonate with you as residents and taxpayers in the city of Worcester. So this is where we're getting your feedback on that. We can't keep all the themes in the plan, so we really want to know which ones resonate the most with you. So when it comes to historic resources, there are a few plans that I reviewed at the city. Our Now Next long-term plan has some sections on culture and history. We have a Becoming Worcester cultural plan, which obviously references where we come from in our historical past. We have our design review guidelines. This is a document that was created by our historical planning division that is really about understanding the different types of architecture and design that exist here in Worcester to aid the Historical Commission and folks who live in historical homes. We have our historic preservation study, as well as our demolition delay ordinance. So these are all the types of documents that went into this initial review in order to understand the landscape of historic resources here. In addition, I had some interviews with community groups, some of which are even here today. I met with the Crown Hill Neighborhood Coalition, the Green Island Community Group, the Preservation Worcester, the Worcester Historical Museum, the Worcester Black History Project, the Antiquarian Society, the Clerk's Office, the Water Operations Division, and the Historical Commission and staff. And these are some of the themes that came out of those conversations. So I'm going to present to you these themes briefly. You'll have an opportunity then to rank how well these themes resonate with you in a similar exercise as we did before. Additionally, if you think that there was a theme that was missed or a priority that you think needs to be included in the community preservation plan, I would invite you to add that to a sticky note and put it on the board as well. So the first theme that came out of conversations with really all of the historical groups that I talked to was this theme of preserving underrepresented stories. And so this idea that Worcester is a community of many diverse populations, but not all of them have been equally represented in historic preservation efforts to date. And so some believe that the historic resource projects and programs in historic resources using CPA funds, the ones that are documenting, preserving, and celebrating those underrepresented histories, those should be the projects that are prioritized amongst the historical resource projects. And so if you were to say that you aligned yourself with this theme and put a blue or a green dot under here, you would say that you agree, that you want to see CPA funds being spent toward projects that preserve underrepresented stories. Another theme that came up was supporting non-income generating historic properties facing economic hardship. And so this is a theme that came up as I was talking to folks in the local historic districts and who work with folks who own historic buildings that may not necessarily be making income off those buildings. These are homeowners that happen to live in historic districts and are therefore required by the Historical Commission to uphold their facades of their house to those historic standards. But maybe they cost a little bit more to do so. And so there was the sentiment that while we do appreciate the historic standards that we want our houses to meet, we understand that some folks might be facing economic hardship and to try and do that. And so in particular, there were two groups of non-income generating historic properties that folks thought that we should be using CPA funds to support. Those are owner-occupied homes, as well as churches. Churches are non-income generating, but a lot of them are in a lot of historic buildings that have a lot of character and really do contribute to the feeling of the city of Worcester. And so if you align yourself with these two themes and want to put blue and green dots there, you're saying that you would like to see CPA dollars be prioritized in projects that are supporting non-income generating historic properties. I see a question.
How is that different than what exists? Is it an adjunct to what people are allowed to get with the application process as it exists now? There is a fund available if there's hardship.
So I am not an expert on all of these, all the funds that exist, but there's currently no city fund that helps folks that are facing economic hardship who have non-income generating. There are actually tax incentives for historical properties that are generating income that have applied to a lot of developments around the city, but not necessarily for a homeowner. You can apply to the Historical Commission to waive those requirements for some of the updates that you need to make, but you generally still have to make them. And Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. So yes, the third, I'm sorry. Oh no, there was a question if there's any funds that currently exist to support non-income generating historic properties in the city.
The housing section may have funding available for low-income property owners that need assistance.
There might be a fund available.
If the funding's available, but right now all the funding's been allocated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there's, yeah, it might be ARPA funding or something.
Well, they have some other programs through block grant, the HUD programs.
Okay. So there might be funding available. This would just be added to that then.
Not necessarily for historic properties, just homes in general.
Homes in general, okay. So this would be specifically for historic properties. Another theme that emerged was the digitization and archiving of historic records. And so this comes from the idea that a lot of records of import are being stored maybe in a Tupperware in someone's basement. Maybe they're the minutes from like the Boys and Girls Club Board of Directors from like the early 1900s, right? And there's not really any program or anything set up to help to digitize and make publicly accessible these records. Another example of this is our official city documents that are being stored here in Town Hall, in City Hall. We are required to keep, birth and marriage certificates from the beginning of the existence of the city. So we have those down in our basement from the 1700s, and getting those digitized is something that some people believe is a priority. So the next theme is protecting historic buildings in danger of demolition. And so some historic properties here in Worcester, of which we have many, go into disrepair to a point where a contractor might decide that they want to demolish that building, and then that historic building is lost forever. Some folks believe that projects that support the acquisition of this property with the intention to restore it to historic standards should be prioritized. Another priority that came out of this process was advancing the city's sustainability goals and promoting adaptive reuse and deconstruction. So this is kind of a multifaceted one, this idea that older buildings do tend to be a little bit more, use a lot more energy to heat and cool. However, it's always always greener to keep an older building than to build a brand new building. And so projects that are rehabilitating historic buildings rather than demolishing it and using all new materials are an example of what could be considered a green project. Adaptive reuse as well is the idea of repurposing a historic facade into a new construction and preserving history in a greener way. So some people believe that projects that are advancing the city's sustainability goals and promote adaptive reuse should be prioritized. And then finally, theme 6, and this came up across many interviews, is the idea that a historic resource project that also qualifies for other CPA funding categories such as open space and recreation or community housing should get priority because it's actually bringing benefit to those other categories as well. And so those are the themes that came out of my conversations with historic resource groups around the city. You're going to have a chance now to be able to kind of weigh in on all of those. What we have now on the board are all of those themes with a brief description of each and a chance for you to put those stickers on again. There are no more orange stickers. It's really just a ranking from red to blue. So blue being it is the most important thing to you, and red being that it is not a priority at all. And so if you're interested in seeing a little bit more information about some of these themes, we have the theme assessment report here. You can scan that code and you can learn a little bit more about each of those themes as well. We have some paper copies up there if you would rather use a paper copy, but this is a virtual version that you can access. And so these are the 4 colors. Red, I do not agree this is a priority. Yellow, this is somewhat a priority. Green, this is a high priority. And blue, this is the most important priority. So I invite you to come up now if there are no questions. Are there any questions? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead. And then of course, to grab a sticky note if you don't feel like these cover all the most important things for you. So actually, thanks for coming. I hope this is not too difficult to go about.
We added the sticky note option on the side.
Yeah, I know that we didn't capture everything, so it really allows you to bring in that perspective if you want to. The full zone is just one of the Oh, I'm sorry, it's the it's not the municipal strategic plan, it's the long-term plan, it's the new master plan. Yeah, so that's the yeah, there's so many. Well, this one's
This one,
So the idea is that there's a historic resource project, for example, someone leaves a building that's historic and turns it into community housing. Then that should be a project that gets more points in our criteria because it's actually also a community
if you have any other thoughts, to grab those sticky notes and feel free to add them on.
It's kind of tricky because all of them are
Big party.
Yes, yeah, we want to make sure that, yeah. Exactly.
Okay, good. Some of us might be getting arrested.
Those are interesting. I never noticed those.
I know, aren't they? They're very cool. They don't look very comfortable though.
Well, she was not made to supposed to sit church meetings.
But is that how you're supposed to be in City Hall too?
This place was built back when churches were. Churches were very part of the community. This was built. I mean, it's beautiful.
It's truly a
Terrific
gorgeous
design.
room, right?
Boat everywhere. I don't know where they found all the trees.
Well, there was a time when we didn't have too many of them, right?
Yeah, well, most people do.
They were full of rocks, that's for sure.
Still are.
I think she captured those themes. There's one each, sorry.
Well, that's going to be the next category. Yep, so we're starting with historic resources, and then we're going into open space next. You're on it. All right. This is great. I see a lot of green and blue, and not so much red in these. All right. Great. A lot of people want to protect those historic buildings. And I just want to say, no one has any additional things they want to add on here. I want to make sure that that continues to be an option, because one of the things we're looking to do tonight too is to hear if there's something that we missed, right? So just at any point, feel free to add that. We're moving these now just to make room for the next group, but please, if you have a thought that occurs to you, just write it down and we'll add it on. All right, we're gonna move into the next category, which is open space and recreation. So this is a really, this is a fun one for me. I used to work in open space and rec myself. So we were reviewing some plans here with the city of Worcester, the Now Next plan, of course, which is really a conglomerate of all of the themes that have come out of the most recent planning activities over the last decade and reevaluating those. We have the open space and recreation plan, which needs to be updated every few years with the Parks and Rec, with the Parks Department. We have our public park master plan, so a lot of our public parks here in Worcester have master plans that were created with community input, usually neighborhood input, and trying to create a roadmap for the development of those parks. We have the Green Worcester plan, which is our plan to become the most sustainable and climate resilient mid-sized city by 2050. The Mobility Action Plan is still in draft form, but it's being developed by our new Department of Transportation and Mobility, and of course our Lakes and Ponds water quality reports. In addition to reviewing these plans, I got to meet with a lot of community groups. There are a lot of community groups working in open space and recreation here in Worcester. I'm not going to list them all out, but it was really fun to get to talk to all of them. And really all these groups are doing such great work. So between the review of those plans, as well as these interviews with these community groups, there were a few themes that emerged that we're going to talk about now. So theme one is this idea of expanding green networks and creating wildlife corridors. So the idea here is that the per acre environmental services that open space delivers, specifically in terms of climate resiliency and habitat services, that increases as a parcel gets bigger. So this idea that if there's a project that's going to expand an existing open space, that project get preferred over one that doesn't. So some believe that open space projects that abut and therefore expand existing protected open space should be prioritized. Another theme that came up was protecting drinking water resources. So the city of Worcester has a series of, I believe, 14 reservoirs that are to the north and the northern part of the city, outside of the city limits. And these, really the idea is that the cost of protecting, stopping contaminants before they get into the water is more cost effective than filtering them out with a filtration plant later. And so this idea of protecting land from development and acquiring land protected from development around our drinking water resources, some folks believe that that is something that should be prioritized amongst open space and recreation projects. Theme 3 is creating and enhancing equitable access to our open space, especially water. And so Worcester has a lot more public green and blue space compared to other cities of its size. But these spaces are generally underutilized, and sometimes it's because of lack of awareness and physically accessible amenities. So some folks believe that projects and programs that make our open space and our parks more accessible should be prioritized. And this could be an accessible parking lot or signage that even just lets you know that this park exists. Theme number 4 is advancing projects that are specified in our park master plans. And the idea here is that this is a plan that was already created with community input and has been approved by the Parks Department, which normally is the one that maintains these facilities, right? So you want to make sure that they're on board with anything that happens in those parks. And so there are some folks who believe that projects that are advancing master plans should be prioritized. Theme 5 is expanding access to fresh, locally grown foods. So there are areas in Worcester that are food insecure or lack access to fresh and healthy produce. And so this, of course, leads to decreased health outcomes. So for formal community gardens and farmers markets are some ways to increase access to healthy food in an equitable way, and all are things that can be done in open space and parks. So gardens also build community and are a classroom for science and life skills. And so some believe that projects and programs that increase access to fresh, locally grown food should be prioritized amongst open space projects. Theme 6 is supporting native species and growing the urban forest. So some of the environmental services that native species and urban trees provide include flood reduction, carbon sequestration, lower air temperatures, neighborhood beautification, and increased biodiversity. Invasive species for and displaced trees, as well as poor landscaping practices. So some folks believe that projects that support and grow Worcester's native plant and tree species should be prioritized amongst CPA projects. Theme number 7 was advancing the city's sustainability and climate resilience goals. So the city is expected to feel increased effects of climate change over the next years. This includes more extreme storms and flooding and more extreme heat. So some believe that open space and recreation projects that increase climate resiliency or are created with creating fewer emissions or have more sustainable building materials should be prioritized. So additionally, theme 8, we have supporting the work of dedicated park and open space community groups. So many city-owned parks and lake areas are advocated for and maintained in part by community organizations or friends of groups. They, in many ways, represent a community's opinion on what investment should be made into the properties and generally have high-impact, low-cost projects. So some folks believe that projects submitted by dedicated park and open space community groups should be prioritized amongst CPA projects. Another theme that came out of conversations we're investing in sustainable trails. So Worcester has tens of miles, maybe more, of hiking trails that crisscross the city. And so many of them are not maintained by the city, but actually by small volunteer-run groups. Prolonged use of these trails and increased erosion because of climate change have caused the trails to need significant upgrades, and preferably with higher quality materials that are going to last longer. So some believe that trail projects that use sustainable materials should be prioritized. Theme number 10 is creating and enhancing alternative mobility options. So I think we could all agree that Worcester is a pretty car-centric city and has insufficient infrastructure for other forms of mobility, such as walking, cycling, or other micro-mobility transit options. So some folks believe that projects that increase walking, cycling, or other modes of transport through and between existing parks should be prioritized. And so this would include something like a linear park or trails in parks that are going to help connect the city in other alternative mobility modes. Theme number 11 was creating and improving access to parks and nature in environmental justice communities. So environmental justice communities are at greater risk of environmental hazards due to a combination of factors. Parks and nature play a critical role in enhancing the well-being and quality of life and provide improved public health outcomes. So some folks believe that the projects that should be prioritized are the ones that take place in environmental justice neighborhoods. And finally, theme 12 is prioritizing open space and recreation projects and programs that qualify for other CPA funding categories. This was a theme that came up amongst a lot of the community groups that were interviewed, that projects that are open space and recreation projects that also touch on community housing or historic resources should get extra points because they're covering more CPA categories. And so these are the 12 priorities that came out of the community meetings and the review of the city documents. And now I'd like to know how you feel about them. And so much in the same way that we did with the previous historic resource themes, I invite you all to come up now and place your stickers in accordance with how well each of these themes resonates with you. Additionally, if there's a theme that you could think of, a priority that you think that we should be spending our CPA funding on, please write that on a sticky note and add it to the board as well. Does anyone have any questions?
Do we need to put our name on the sticky note?
You do not have to put your name on the sticky note. You could if you want to take credit for it.
I will. I'll add.
So just the meetings I had with the community groups.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So you've heard a lot of this information before.
Well, they were very happy with you.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And that was part of the information gathering. Yes.
I'm glad you said old and new and that's
Oh, that's the way the process works, right? So we're trying to as many people as possible. Yeah.
You know, the way I see this is like a really democratic fund. You know, like we voted into this, and now we get to shape the program. So it's actually pretty good.
Okay, so it's like 50-50, some people push towards this, some people.
There were a lot of it was good first. No sick, yeah. But it happens. They come off pretty easily though, right?
Change, yes.
You can change it if you need to. I'll take pictures immediately upon the end of the night so that nothing falls off or changes. Or the heat here will dry everything out.
should have made them bigger so that everyone wasn't crowding too much, but make sure you get all of them. Yeah. Yes, and so that would be, it's different, there's not necessarily funding associated with that. The way it works is that you wouldn't be required to do the upgrade.
Oh.
Yes,
Kidding.
exactly. That's correct, right? Like those applications for undue hardship is that you wouldn't necessarily, you're not sure. Yeah, but that's my understanding is that you might not be required to hit all of the standards, or you could use different materials than were part of, yeah. Yes, yeah. But,
So you have to argue the case because then have someone who wants to build it. That's what she would do for a house, which is why they can afford the historic commission. Because they want to put it on a slate roof.
right. Right.
Better than have a roof than it be.
Exactly. So in this case, it would be providing funding so that that person can put a slate on, you know.
That's what that's not the question then becomes who's guiding the historic commission in their decision making, because this is
Right.
no one's coming to us from the historic commission.
It's impressive,
You could create it. That's what the white machine is going to So that's the question. The question in all this is who belongs to the historic commission. This is a serious question. Because I don't know if the town belongs on the historic commission. We'll put it over.
Oh, thank you.
An acquisition of history beyond buildings.
No, there was not, that fee didn't come up. Yeah, so I'm glad you asked.
Because if
Notre Dame is nice.
beyond Lincoln was something we can
On
divide
West
them as a city.
Right, if you know where
To be
the,
able to just divide them, but non-buildings. The historic commission can't have a vote them because they don't have a.
Well, they would very well call it West. So I don't see that. I'm sorry.
No, but it requires a reconsideration here. And the qualifications. So there should be like some background on it.
That's fair. Just for, you put that on there?
Acquisition of non-building history.
All right.
If I'm going past it sometime, right? Alright, yeah, that's the one of us. These are Giovanni Bakery or something. Yes. Right? Okay, yep. So sorry. Okay. Yes, here, all right.
And so folks, just for your information, if you know other people who want to participate in these activities, we did record the session yesterday afternoon. It was a virtual session, and that's going to be put on the City of Worcester website so that folks can get this information. And then we're going to have an online survey that kind of replicates this exercise so that people can follow along and put in their votes in a very similar, comparable way. So look out for that. We're hoping to we want to get it translated into a few languages and hopefully up next week. Awesome.
I'm running out of blue.
If you need more blue, there's more blue. Yeah, if people need more stickers, let us know.
You'll find them all the way out of the building.
Yeah, it is.
If we had preserved the city's archives, we would know that there's a wonderful petition for access to fresh vegetables by local gardeners in the Worcester area.
Oh.
If we had made those things digitally accessible, we would know that.
Well, that becomes a priority, then maybe there'll
Don't
be
it,
some
though?
CPA funding for it.
Don't it, though?
That was first. That was first. so much, everyone. We're reaching the last leg of the presentation tonight, and it's a big one. There's a lot of work going into community housing, and it was really a great pleasure to get to interview the folks working in community housing as well. So when it came to community housing plans, we reviewed, again, the Now Next plan really does cover a lot of our long-range goals here in the city. We also have our analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. This is a document that we're required to submit every few years that is pretty much exactly that. What are the mic was off. What are the impediments to fair housing choice? We are currently in the process of creating a housing production plan here in the city of Worcester that is also collecting a lot of public feedback, and so I've been attending those meetings, hearing what they're saying there. We have a housing strategy that I was reviewing, and also our inclusionary zoning ordinance that was recently passed. These are some of the community groups that I got to meet with and pick their brains about the themes and priorities around the city of Worcester when it comes to community housing. We have the Housing Authority, Community Housing Resources, Worcester Together Community Housing Coalition, Worcester Community Connection Coalition, Worcester Common Ground, Habitat for Humanity, the Maine South Community Development Corporation, Abby's House, and Worcester Affordable Housing Trust, and the Worcester Housing Development Division here in the city of Worcester. And we are still in the process of conducting more interviews, not just in community housing, but in other categories as well. So I'm going to jump right into it because we have quite a few themes that came out of conversations around community housing. The first theme that came up was increasing rates of home ownership. And so we know that home ownership benefits include increased personal financial security, the ability to build equity, and as well as neighborhood stabilization and strengthened communities. Right now, rising rents mean that cities' renters are being increasingly priced out of a path to home ownership. And most of our deed-restricted units are actually rental units. We have a very small percentage of our deed-restricted units, I think it's like 0.5%, are actually home ownership units. So there are some folks that believe that projects and programs that increase the rates of home ownership should be prioritized. The second theme is supporting more rental assistance programs here in the city. So rental assistance programs help eligible tenants cover either first and last month's rent or supplement rent payments in the case of unforeseen circumstances that may lead to non-payment. So rental assistance programs can be more cost-effective than supporting individuals and families who become unhoused. And so that also, of course, leads to better health and social outcomes. So some believe that rental assistance programs should be prioritized among CPA projects and programs. Theme 3, providing housing for the unhoused population. So the unhoused population is one of our most vulnerable populations here in the city. Shelter space is limited and permanent housing can take a long time to secure. So some folks believe that projects and programs that provide housing to the unhoused population should be prioritized amongst community housing projects. Theme number 4 is the creation of more accessible housing. So we have an increasing demand for accessible and age-in-place units, which is leading to a shortage. Some believe that projects that are going to increasing housing accessibility should be prioritized, especially for individuals with disabilities and our senior population. Theme number 5 was supporting higher environmental standards and achieving the city's sustainability and resilience goals. And so as we've already mentioned tonight, buildings are one of the major contributors to climate change through energy use. So asphalt roofs exacerbate flooding and heat island effects in neighborhoods, and there are certifications and best practices for buildings and landscape design that reduce emissions and help to alleviate flooding and heat island effects. And so some folks believe that those projects and programs that are community housing that are going to help achieve the city's climate resilience and sustainability goals should be prioritized amongst the community housing projects. Theme number 6 is supporting deeper housing affordability. So this is a two-parter. The idea here is serving households earning below identified area median incomes. As I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, the Community Preservation Act allows you to fund community housing projects up to 100% of the area median income. This chart is the housing and urban development chart for different area median incomes for different family sizes. And as you can see here, we could go up to 100% with these projects. A lot of communities, however, choose to have a lower AMI that they want to support with community housing funds. And so, specifically, some of the themes that I heard in these conversations was prioritizing projects and programs that serve households up to 60% of AMI. So these are residents that are likely working full or part-time, but struggling to find housing with a rent or mortgage they can afford, and are maybe one emergency away from missing their rent payment. So while this is more challenging to develop than market rate housing, developing 60% AMI housing is considered more financially feasible than developing 30% AMI. So that's theme 6A. Theme 6B is providing housing opportunities and prioritizing projects that serve households up to 30% of the area median income. So residents in this income band are some of the city's most vulnerable populations. So creating housing at 30% AMI and below requires incredibly large subsidies and a commitment to ongoing services. So there's a larger shortage of these units in Worcester compared to any other AMI category. Theme number 7 is supporting community housing development projects that have certain qualities. So in this case, we have, we're talking about new community housing development projects, and we know we need to continue to build new housing development to accommodate our housing shortages. If we're going to use CPA dollars to do that, what are the qualities that we're looking for in our development projects? Theme 7A says, increasing the number of residents served. So these are bigger projects with more units of affordable housing that serve more individuals and families. So these developers are generally experienced. They're building quickly and require less oversight from the city. They're more expensive and tend to also have more access to other funding sources. So that's one theme when it comes to certain qualities. The next theme is providing opportunities to emerging developers. So emerging developers refer to developers that have not had more than 3 affordable housing developments, and they're usually quite small. They take longer to complete. However, there might be an increased personal investment into the property and the well-being of the tenants. So these are much smaller projects by more, they call them emerging developers. Theme 7C is advancing shovel-ready projects. So CPA allows for the funding of feasibility studies, design fees, engineering fees for the creation of affordable housing. Some folks believe that we should actually be just spending or prioritizing projects that are already ready to build. And so these are projects that have already had initial investment and are probably most likely to be built on the fastest timeline. Theme 7D is increasing infill development. So infill development refers to housing constructed on vacant or underutilized land within an existing developed area, including existing units on residential land such as ADUs or accessory dwelling units. Adaptive reuse refers to the process of reusing an existing building for another purpose, so community housing. That then what the building was maybe originally designed for, taking an old warehouse and turning it into affordable housing as opposed to building a new unit. Theme 7E is supporting developers who have demonstrated they will keep their units affordable after deed restrictions expire. So a lot of times when there are subsidies for constructing affordable units, the developers are required to put a deed restriction on the property. This means that they are required to keep that unit affordable for usually about 30 years. After that, they're allowed to charge market rate, and some do. So this theme is all about seeing who those developers are that have been committed to not charging market rate after their deed restrictions end, because 30 years actually goes by pretty quickly. So theme 7F is creating open space and recreational facilities for children and families. So some believe that the community housing projects that respect the natural environment or provide recreational facilities should be prioritized. This idea is that it's not just creating housing, it's creating recreational activities and a space for families as well. And so those projects should be prioritized. So those are the different criteria or qualities that people want to see in community housing development projects. Some people think that there are certain populations that we need to prioritize when it comes to CPA funds. So projects and programs that are serving these populations should rise to the top of the pile when we're looking at these projects. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because they're mostly self-explanatory, but please stop me if you need to. Theme 8A is seniors. Worcester has an aging population and there's a lack of affordable housing that's accessible with the amenities that seniors need. Theme 8B, people with disabilities. So there are certain accessible units that are a lot harder to come by here in the city of Worcester. And our current number is well below the need for people with disabilities. 8C is young parents. Young parents are generally early in their careers and have more limited economic resources, as well as more housing space needs than folks who aren't parents. Theme 8D is families. Families have more individuals and require more space. Currently, there are fewer 3 and 4 bedroom affordable units compared to other housing sizes in the city. Theme 8E is youth. Youth who experience housing insecurity are more likely to have insecure housing later in life. 8F is immigrants, especially refugees. So these populations may have a more difficult time finding housing due to language or cultural barriers. They may also be more likely to have a lower income. Theme 8G is longtime residents of red line neighborhoods. So systemic racism and redlining practices have had a negative economic consequence here in Worcester. To this day, Worcester's previously red line neighborhoods have fewer homeownership opportunities. So the idea is maybe prioritizing projects that take place in these areas. Theme 8H is unhoused couples. So a lot of shelters for individuals are not large enough to accommodate domestic partners, and so prioritizing projects that target them. Theme 8I is single women. Single women face unique challenges and may benefit from having specific services or programs. And then theme 8J is persons struggling with addiction. So people dealing with drug addiction are a particularly vulnerable population that may require services that make finding housing more difficult to find. So these are the different types of populations that some folks feel like we should be prioritizing when we're looking at community housing applications. Theme number 9 is supporting local landlords of non-deed restricted properties. So there are landlords out there that usually are small landlords, and they have maybe a 3-decker and they're keeping their rent low because they like their tenants and it's an affordable rent and they don't want their tenants to leave. Actually, 33% of all rental units in Worcester are what is called naturally occurring affordable housing. So this is non-deed restricted housing that's below market rate. But as demand increases, that landlord might feel inclined to go to market rate. So what can we do to incentivize these landlords to place deed restrictions on their properties to keep it affordable? And a lot of times that has to do with helping them put on that new roof or helping them to put that new siding on that maybe they weren't able to afford because they were keeping their rents so low. Theme 9B is supporting landlords that rent to the homeless population. There are some programs that support landlords that choose to rent to homeless individuals and families, but more incentives may help to create more options for folks or may create more options for folks, more incentives, yeah. So theme 10 is prioritizing community housing projects and programs that qualify for other CPA funding categories as well. Just like in the other categories, people thought that if a community housing project was also a historic resource project or an open space and recreation project, that maybe that should have more points. And so that was a lot of information. We actually had quite a few boards to go through. If you need more stickers, let us know. But before we begin, does anyone have any questions on any of those priorities? There are quite a few, I know. And of course, if you have more priorities, put them on the board. John?
Yeah, Lakeside, when they build the new Lakeside after they tear it down, they have a section of the housing that the people that rent to own. And I was thinking, as part of that, is it possible to help with any kind of stimulation you could give to those people that are renting to own, so they can go transition from public housing into their own properties? That would be one of the, when you say existing housing, it's not built yet, it's shovel ready.
Right.
It falls into a lot of categories.
Mhm.
That was just the idea that we can actually help people get out of the public housing and into the private market. I think was one that was a real good team in that whole project. And one of the reasons in my neighborhood I supported it 100%. It's one of the things that I thought was fantastic.
And there's certainly a way to do that with the CPA fund. So please put that on a sticky note
Okay.
and put it up there.
All right.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? All right. Well then, let's work on our themes for community housing.
All right,
Are you
I'll
heading
start in
out?
the middle and work my way up. Just remind me, green, blue, green, yellow, red.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
So far.
Yeah, that would be great. So the person is, the petition, they should, and that's why,
means that these folks who get the developers who come in and say that they want to treat that individual who's not really all the benefit is he's gonna have 2 or 3 units that are like 3% of whatever. So that's kind of, I don't know.
I will put on two other things. I heard the meeting
Connect four.
it's just like usually like people are campaigning for this. All those thousands. That's a lot of it. And I was just had to think, one of the things that we need is to do one of the next, big lot, all the money and put it into one thing.
What you're allowed to do.
Impact me. That's where a lot of. On that now. But this is a great process, it's a great work. So, covered all this time. Everything up here is stuff. My pleasure. I made a trip with my wife. Thank you. All right, I did my voting. You're a good man. I was thinking, I was good.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, thank you. Actually, Paul, I think I'll leave that one up just so that people can scan it on their way out if they want to stay up to date. Yeah, thank you.
That's a great point. You're doing great stuff, by the way. Please bring a plate home, drinks, whatever. The more you take, the less they will bring us gifts.
Yeah.
Hey, Jack, where's the dessert?
You know, I did consider getting some cookies, but the rain stopped.
No cookies, no cake.
I know, usually at the Lakes and Ponds stuff, we would have some cookies. I'll keep that in mind for the next one.
The cookies are more important than the sandwich. Didn't you advertise that this would be here? If you did, I didn't even see it.
There were some flyers that had it. It wasn't everywhere though. But they're coming back for the Spanish language one, so if you want more, you can come and listen to this in Spanish.
Yeah, I sit there and go, what?
All right. All right, thanks so much everyone for sticking through and filling out your priorities for community housing. So we're gonna wrap up now. I just wanted to give you some last information for what's next for the community preservation plan, something to look forward to. So here's the timeline. So in December, we're going to continue to collect input at these community forums. As I mentioned, we had a forum yesterday and we're going to have a forum next week in Spanish. After that, we're going to have a recording of the virtual forum yesterday on the City of Worcester website, along with a survey that replicates these questions that folks are able to take after watching the online presentation. So we're going to continue to collect all that community input, and in January we'll spend the first month keeping that survey, first half of the month keeping that survey open, and then we're going to incorporate all that information into a draft community preservation plan. We're going to establish those goals, and then we're going to publish that draft on the City of Worcester website and have an open comment period for about 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to have a public hearing with the Community Preservation Committee, in which folks could come and voice their opinion on the final goals that were selected for the plan, and we'll talk more about that. And we'll incorporate that feedback to that draft plan into the final version, which we're hoping to have published in spring of 2025. At that point, we're going to start advertising the grant application that will be open, and people will be able to submit their projects. While we're going to make the application process as simple as possible to have it be as accessible to folks as possible, we are also going to hold public workshops in which, if you have an idea or if you want to come and run ideas by us, you would come and learn about that application process, learn about project eligibility, and be walked through the steps for submitting a project to the Community Preservation Committee. We're going to have the applications open for a few months, allowing people to develop their applications and line up any other funding sources. And then in the summer of 2025, we're hoping to review and score those applications with the Community Preservation Committee, and we will contact those successful applicants. So there's more to come. It's very exciting times. If you're interested in staying up to date on everything that's going on, all of those different milestones, please sign up for the Community Preservation Committee newsletter. We probably send it out about once a month, and it will have things like the next Community Preservation Committee meeting, when the application's open, and ultimately some project updates when we start having projects coming down the pike. If you're interested in more information, you can visit the Community Preservation Act webpage, which is worcesterma.gov/CPP. There you'll find the application as well as other informational slideshows where you can get more information on the minimum eligibility for projects, as well as some of the exercises that we went through tonight. The Community Preservation Committee also has a webpage where you can access the meetings virtually that they hold about once monthly. And the Community Preservation Committee, I mentioned earlier, is a statewide nonprofit that provides technical support to Community Preservation Committee cities. And they have a wealth of information and FAQs on project eligibility and a whole data bank of all of the different projects that have happened over the last 20 years, over 8,000 projects. You could sort them by funding category, by town, and just get a really great wealth of information on the Community Preservation Act projects throughout the state. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for joining tonight. I really appreciate you all coming out here. We really do feel like the Community Preservation Act is an opportunity to have democracy in action. All of you as taxpayers have voted CPA into existence, and now we really want your input and the priorities for those projects. And we also want to see you apply for projects. So we'll be looking out for those applications. And we hope to be in touch with you all soon. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to me with any questions or concerns, this is my email address, burmeisterj@worcesterma.gov. I have some cards available on the table as well. If you want to grab those and give them to your friends if they have questions. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. And